When you think of the piano or the opera, or let's say the works of Da Vinci or Michelangelo, would you ever think that a small peasant family from Italy would be the reason they all exist? Here's the thing, on top of all of this, almost everything we do today as a society is influenced by one family, the Medici family. Now look, an incredibly boring topic in finance is called double entry bookkeeping, but here's the thing, this double entry system is linked to the birth of capitalism, and capitalism shapes almost every single decision we make. It impacts every move that the governments or businesses make in some way. Double entry bookkeeping is a dull concept for sure, but it shapes how we look at finance today. It makes commerce more transparent, accurate, and reliable. Every transaction is recorded twice, and hence the name. Once as a debit and once as a credit. And this method prevents errors. It builds trust in financial records. And that's precisely why some have linked it to the birth of capitalism itself. And the people we have to thank for this is none other than the influential Medici family. In fact, modern commerce would not have been possible without the Medicis. Things like holding companies, letters of credit, urban planning, art galleries, and so much more have been influenced by them. Now look, all of these may have existed in some form before, but it was the brilliance of the Medici family that made them popular and actually usable. So the question is, how did the Medici family acquire so much influence? And more importantly, what ended their centuries-long rule over Florence? So let's start at the beginning. This influential, rich family actually started off in medieval Europe as peasants. Their fortune began to change when some of them saw new opportunities in commerce and moved to Florence. And in a few generations, they were counted amongst wealthy notables, but they were still not considered one of the leading families of the city. But all of this was about to change. Beginning in 1340, an economic depression hit Europe. This caused many powerful families to go bankrupt. The Medici family, however, were able to escape this fate. They took full advantage of the situation to establish themselves amongst the city's elite. There were a few traits about the family that made them thrive when everyone else was in chaos. This would continue to support them as they steadily rose to dominate Florence. You see, the Medici family had a very different outlook when they were conducting business. They had a very different point of view from your traditional European nobility. Even though they had passive wealth and power, they avoided fighting and violence. They weren't soldiers themselves, and they decided to win over their adversaries with bribes of gold, rather than engage them with armed men. The Medici family also sought favor with the city's middle and lower classes. This commitment to being plebeian lasted long after them, with many other powerful families imitating this strategy. They also had a deep passion for the arts, literature, and construction. As patrons of the art, they were not only generous, but they were also enlightened. Some even consider them to be the most remarkable patrons the West has ever seen. This patronage safeguarded both their reputation and commanded admiration even when times were hard and people were rebellious. Another trait I should add about the Medici family is their resilience. Many times the family saw ruin only to rise again, even more powerful. For instance, the first attempt at ruling Florence came under the descendants of Chiarissimo II Medici. However, their policy of consolidating their position by controlling the government led to 50 years of serious misfortunes. This occurred from 1343 to 1393. Salvestro de' Medici, Chiarissimo II's grandson, allied with the common people to seize back influence. And for a time, this worked. He was elected the head of the city government in 1378. However, when the popular government fell in 1381, he and the rest of his family had to go into exile. So yeah, the family had their fair share of troubles as well. Meanwhile, a distant cousin, Everardo de' Medici, would usher in a new line of the Medici family. He had a son named Giovanni de' Bicci de' Medici. I'm sorry if I'm twisting the pronunciation. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but let's call him Giovanni. Now, Giovanni is important. Remember this name because he is integral to the story of the Medicis. The true history and success of the Medici family starts right here with Giovanni. He's considered the first of the great Medici family. He inherited the family business, which was based on cloth and silk manufacturing and banking. Now, Giovanni's foresight was his gift. He sensed the winds of change and aimed to concentrate more on the banking side. With the help of his uncle, Giovanni started his banking career and quickly rose through the ranks. So when his uncle, Vieri, retired in 1393, Vieri handed over the bank to Giovanni, which would end up securing the Medici family's name and future wealth and prosperity. Giovanni then went on to have two sons, Cosimo and Lorenzo, and each created their own legacies. Cosimo de' Medici was the more famous and important of the two brothers. Cosimo was born in 1389 and established the family's political base. He served on the Florentine Board of War and held other important posts. By the 1350s, with his success, the Medici family began to outdistance their political rivals. Now, Cosimo's rival was this person named Rinaldo Albizzi, and Rinaldo was jealous. He tried to get rid of Cosimo by filling a council with his supporters to blame Cosimo for a costly war that was happening back then. Now, although they could not get the city to execute Cosimo, they managed to exile him to Venice in 1433. But again, if you kicked a Medici down, he would only come back strong. This exactly happened with Cosimo. He returned stronger with the support of his family's bank, political allies, and popularity amongst the people. Rinaldo Albizzi's hopes for ever regaining power were utterly crushed. Rinaldo should have known better. Cosimo was a shrewd politician. He used his wealth to support various projects and relied on his supporters to maintain his influence. This was a smart move because this approach kept his own role less visible and at the same time made it harder for rivals to attack him. Cosimo also knew when to seize opportunities to boost his popularity. For example, his involvement in the Peace of Lodi in 1454 is one clear example. It brought peace between Venice and Milan and showcased his immense political skill. And personally, Cosimo was very rich. His wealth is estimated to be around $450 million in today's money. And under his patronage, the Medici family transformed Florence into the cradle of the Renaissance. This is considered a period of great scientific, artistic, and cultural rebirth in Europe. It's also why Cosimo earned the title of the Elder, or the Father of the Nation. Cosimo was succeeded by his son, Piero di Cosimo de' Medici. Like his father, Piero was also politically gifted. He continued to strengthen the family's political power, and this was despite his physical limitations. You see, Piero was afflicted by gout, which causes immense pain in your joints, and he had it really bad. Because it was so bad that he was effectively paralyzed and he was in great pain, he couldn't move. But he still had the willpower to keep his family relevant in the complex politics of 15th century Italy. A case in example is 1466. Piero found out about a plot to overthrow him, and he showed quite a bit of courage here. He had himself carried to Florence on a litter, which is basically a small wheelless vehicle, and he successfully defended himself against his enemies by moving out of the location where they just expected him to be because of his illness. Now, his physical limitations didn't prevent him from going into war either. When Venice waged war against Florence, Piero allied with Milan and Naples, and he defeated the condottiere Bartolomeo Caglione at Imola. He then went on to acquire Sarzana and Sarzanello for his city. But perhaps Piero's greatest achievements was raising his talented son, Lorenzo. He succeeded him and proved to be as capable as his grandfather Cosimo. Lorenzo de' Medici holds an honored place in the history of Florence and Italy. Unlike his ancestors, he wasn't just a patron of the arts and a skilled statesman. He was also a creative individual himself. He was famous for his own poetry. He also knew the importance of securing allies. Lorenzo's marriage to the prominent Orsini family added aristocratic support to the Medici family's wealth and political influence. His diplomatic efforts were crucial in securing Florence against its enemies, gaining new allies, and strengthening his own position. Under him, Florence received the greatest gift that could be afforded to a 15th century Italian city: peace. However, Lorenzo died at the premature age of 43 years old only. This meant that he did not have the time to train his sons adequately in the art of politics. After his eldest son Piero took over, the family quickly lost public favor. He was unable to prevent France from declaring war against the city. Also, by signing an unfavorable peace treaty with France, Piero gave an opening for his enemies to exploit. So after just 2 years in power, he was expelled from Florence in 1494, and then he died in exile. It was left to his younger brother Giovanni to secure the family's comeback. He was, in fact, amongst the most influential people of his time. And that's because he was the Pope, with his pontifical name being Leo X. And with his help, the Medici family now returned back to Florence. During this time, Pope Leo X continued his father's tradition of supporting the arts. As the Pope, he supported famous artists like Michelangelo. He also had the patronage of his father, Lorenzo. Under Pope Leo, Michelangelo began the work of the Medici chapel. Pope Leo also supported his brother's son, also named Lorenzo, to regain control in Florence. Lorenzo's daughter, Catherine de' Medici, later became the Queen of France by marrying King Henry II. 3 of her 4 sons would eventually come to rule France as well. However, this revival was short-lived. Remember Cosimo? By the early 1520s, very few of his descendants remained. Giulio de' Medici, the illegitimate son of Lorenzo the Magnificent's brother Giuliano, abdicated power in 1523 to also become pope, taking the name Pope Clement VII. With his influence, Pope Clement VII installed his own illegitimate son, Alessandro, as the hereditary Duke of Florence. Now, this was a big departure from the family's usual political strategy, which was to rule from behind the scenes. Clement VII abolished the city's old constitution, ending whatever semblance the city had of being a republic. Free of any restraints, Alessandro's rule was brutal and oppressive, so it's not a shock when I tell you that within a few years of his rule, he was assassinated by his own relatives. But this did not end the Medici family's influence entirely in Europe. A younger branch of the family emerged to take back the power. These were the descendants of Lorenzo, the younger brother of Cosimo the Elder. The power flew straight to the great-great-grandson of Lorenzo, who became Duke of Florence and then Grand Duke of Tuscany in 1569 and reigned as Cosimo I. He established a new dynasty that perpetuated the family's traditional regard for arts and sciences. Now his son, Francesco or Francis, succeeded him. However, he proved to be less effective as a leader. He did, however, manage to forge stronger ties with France, a crucial feat necessary for the independence of the Italian states. This was done through political marriage. Francis's daughter, Marie, became Queen of France by marrying Henry IV in 1600, and their son, Louis XIII, ruled France from 1610 to 1643. Now, back to Francesco or Francis. He was known for being a suspicious despot and a hard tax master. His rule nearly ruined the nation's economy. Despite this, he continued the Medici tradition of patronage. He supported the goldsmith Benvenuto Cellini and was interested in science, particularly in chemistry. His efforts led to the establishment of the Florentine porcelain factory. Now moving on, he was succeeded by his younger brother Ferdinand, who succeeded him in 1587. Unlike Francis, his rule was much less troubled. Ferdinand was different from his brother Francis. He was known for his fairness. Ferdinand restored stability and prosperity to Tuscany. He also founded Villa Medici in Rome and bought many priceless works of art in Florence. From Ferdinand, his son Cosimo II inherited a prosperous and peaceful state. He liked to learn and greatly improved the region's agricultural productivity. Tuscany's rich harvests helped feed Europe and contributed to the region's wealth. Yet again, a lack of male heirs led to the Medici family's downfall. Cosimo II's son, Ferdinand II, had only one living heir, Cosimo III. He in turn was succeeded by his only son, John Gastone, but John actually never managed to have any children. John Gastone's death in 1737 effectively marked the end of the Medici family tree. The rule over their Grand Duchy transferred to the Dukes of Lorraine, which was a house linked to the Austrian Habsburgs. John Gastone was survived only by his sister, Anna Maria Luisa de' Medici. She got married to Johann Wilhelm II, Elector Palatine of the Austrian Empire. Now she moved with him to Dusseldorf, where they lived for 25 years, and despite having a happy and fulfilling marriage, Anna Maria Luisa and John Wilhelm had no children. And so with their death, the Medici bloodline actually just came to an end. But did it? I mean, what about all the people in modern times whose surnames are Medici? Some of them are actually distant relatives of the main Medici line. So let's explore how some of their relatives kept the name alive. Remember Marie de' Medici, Francesco's daughter? Well, she became a key figure in European history. She was married to Henry IV of France. After her husband's assassination, she took over power, and she took on the role of regent for their young son, Louis XIII. Her regency, however, proved to be a disaster. She mishandled the state's finances and made numerous concessions to rebellious nobles. and for this, she was eventually moved into exile. Now, she eventually was given leniency, but she would still continue to face trouble. She was banished for a second time when she was trying to get her son to fire a minister. I mean, she was kind of her own worst enemy. She fled to Brussels eventually, where she would live her final days in poverty. Anyway, after she was gone, her son, Louis XIII, managed to turn things around. He worked closely with his shrewd chief minister, Cardinal Richelieu. Now, he transformed France into a dominant European power. Now, Marie's daughter, Henrietta, also played a significant role in history. She became the mother of James II, the last Catholic king of Great Britain. Now, back in Italy, there was this influential house of Ottaviano. The branch of the Medici family, ruling over Ottaviano near Naples, stayed influential in the kingdom of the Two Sicilies until well into the modern day. And curiously enough, the Habsburg that inherited Tuscany after the last Medici male died was also distantly related to the family. This was through Francis Stephen of Lorraine, and he was the great-great-great-grandson of Francesco I de' Medici. Thanks to this connection, the Habsburg-Lorraine family managed to secure Florence and continue their legacy in their own way. In fact, many prominent Habsburg monarchs had a mother or a grandmother or a great-grandmother from the Medici family. This just showcases how much prestige the family enjoyed. Some of their most powerful, noble families are willing to marry their sons and secure alliances. And this was happening well into the time when the Medici family wasn't entirely considered blue-blooded. Now, the Medici family's origin story may have been humble, but their influence commanded respect all over Europe. You see, most other noble families built their power through land, but not the Medicis. They did it through finance. The innovations that they introduced, and therefore popularized in the process, led to a revolution that would go on to permanently transform Europe. Remember how I initially mentioned that any financial practices used today had their origins with the Medici family? And this is because the family had an insane amount of cash because the Medici bank was so successful. To manage this vast amount of cash, they needed a sophisticated method to track incoming and outgoing money. And this was basically how double bookkeeping was invented. And to keep up, their competitors also had to follow suit to use this double bookkeeping method as well. Soon, that just became the norm, and it's how modern finance began to evolve. The double-entry bookkeeping system is now a standard operating procedure for many. But the Medici family was more than just bankers. First and foremost, they were politicians and patrons of arts and culture. Their patronage contributed significantly to Europe's Renaissance and made Florence into one of the continent's leading cities. They were a powerful family that simply didn't focus their wealth and power to elevate their own status. Rather, they focused on building soft power, privilege, and contributed to building culture. They sponsored cultural projects, supported the arts, and ensured Florence remained free from foreign control. And by extension, they made sure history would remember them for centuries to come. I mean, think of any famous Italian artist or architect from the Renaissance period. It's likely that the Medici family backed them. During Cosimo de' Medici's time, the family spent a staggering 600,000 gold florins on major architectural projects, artistic endeavors, and educational initiatives. Adjusted for inflation, today that's more than 112 million US dollars. And amongst the most iconic examples of their support is the Florence Cathedral, or the Duomo di Firenze. Cosimo's patronage helped save the bankrupt architect Filippo from obscurity, and that's why he was able to go on and complete the city's magnificent dome. The Medici family also funded masterpieces like Donatello's statue of David and numerous works by Fra Angelico. Their money supported some of the Renaissance period's brightest talents, including Michelangelo, who worked for the Medici throughout his career. Michelangelo even attended an art academy established by Lorenzo de' Medici near Piazza San Marco. The Medici family also backed intellectual pursuits. They sponsored Marsilio Ficino's Platonic Academy, funded by the library at the monastery of San Marco, and supported manuscript production. This right here helped to greatly revive and popularize the ideas of ancient Greece and Rome in Europe. In short, under the Medici rule, Florence became a cradle for Renaissance brilliance, home to figures like Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, and Niccolò Machiavelli. The family commissioned so many works of art that they had to build an entire museum to house them, the Uffizi Gallery. Now, if you take a look back at history, Many families and prominent figures have come and gone, but not a lot of them are remembered as much as the Medici family. They were savvy financiers and shrewd politicians, and they managed to overcome various odds to secure themselves amongst the most illustrious dynasties of Europe. What sets them apart is their patronage for the arts and culture and their contributions to finance. Now, of course, they weren't perfect. There were a lot of problematic things that they've done, but it's impossible to ignore the contributions that they've made and how it all impacts us to this day. Now, if you stuck around to the end, please drop an icon for the flag of Italy in the comments below. I'd love to see how many of you stuck around. Thanks so much for watching. Please do subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on the next one.